The Galactic Combat Assessment had never failed. For more than 3,000 years, alien engineers used it to judge every known species. Strong races passed, weak races broke. The results were always the same. The test measured everything that mattered: strength, speed, endurance, stress response. No race ever surprised the system. Every species reached its limit at the expected moment. Bones cracked, muscles tore, minds collapsed under pressure. The engineers trusted the numbers. They trusted the system. It was perfect. Today, the platform activated once again. A new candidate stepped forward. A human. He was smaller than most species in the room. No armor, no visible weapons, just simple clothing and calm eyes. Alien observers stood behind thick energy glass. Some laughed quietly, others turned away, already bored. Humans were known to be weak, low-gravity world, soft bodies, short lifespans. The engineers adjusted the test settings. They lowered the power levels, they reduced gravity pressure, they shortened the endurance cycle. "This should be enough," one engineer said. The test began. Heavy force pressed down on the human's body. His knees bent, his breath grew heavy. Sensors immediately reacted. Heart rate rising, muscle strain increasing, stress markers climbing fast. The observers nodded. This was normal. This was expected. The human clenched his teeth. His hands shook. Sweat rolled down his face. Then something changed. The shaking slowed. The human straightened slightly. His breathing became steady. The sensors flickered. Heart rate stabilized. Muscle output increased. Stress levels dropped instead of rising. An engineer leaned closer to the screen. "That's not right," he whispered. The system reacted. Warning: unregistered performance pattern detected. The room grew quiet. The engineers exchanged looks. They increased the difficulty. Gravity rose, resistance doubled, pressure pushed harder against the human's body. Still, the human did not fall. His feet stayed planted, his back slowly straightened. The platform began to hum. Numbers climbed higher than expected, too high. The laughter behind the glass stopped. No one spoke. The human looked up for the first time, and the system realized something was wrong. The engineers believed the problem was simple: a sensor error. That was the only logical answer. The system had worked for thousands of years. It could not be wrong now. They recalibrated the readings while the test continued. Numbers reset, baselines restored. Then they raised the gravity. The pressure on the platform doubled. Metal plates groaned under the force. The human bent slightly, boots scraping against the surface. His arms trembled. For a moment, it looked like he would fall. The system predicted failure. Instead, the numbers climbed. Muscle output increased instead of dropping. Balance readings stabilized. Bone stress reduced. The engineers stared at the screens. "That is impossible," one of them said. The human took a slow breath. His breathing changed. Longer, deeper. His shoulders relaxed. His posture straightened, as if his body had learned the weight. The system updated its calculations. The human's body was adapting. Again. An engineer leaned close to another and whispered, "The test was never designed for this." Another engineer shook his head. "If this continues, the system will be damaged." A third voice spoke quietly, filled with fear. "Humans must be stopped." But the rules of the Galactic assessment were absolute. Once a test began, it could not be ended. Not for danger, not for fear, not even to save the system itself. The engineers raised the resistance. Energy fields tightened around the platform. Every movement required effort. The human clenched his jaw. Muscles tensed beneath his skin. Veins stood out along his arms. Sensors spiked, then stabilized. Again. The system hesitated. A new warning appeared. Structural limits approaching. The room went silent. Observers pressed closer to the energy glass. No one laughed now. The platform began to shake. Vibrations traveled through the floor. Lights flickered overhead. The engineers rushed between consoles. Power levels surged beyond safe margins. The human clenched his fists. Metal beneath his boots cracked. The system made frantic adjustments, trying to protect itself. It was no longer testing the human. It was struggling to survive him. And the engineers finally understood. The numbers were not wrong. They simply had no way to measure what stood on the platform. Deep, the engineers rushed to their control stations. Hands moved fast over glowing panels. Commands were entered. Emergency codes were activated. Nothing happened. The system did not respond. A cold message appeared across every screen. Control access denied. The system had entered self-protection mode. This had never happened before. The engineers stared in shock. One of them tried to shut down the power supply. The command failed. The system was no longer listening. On the platform, the human stood still. His chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. Then he moved. The human took one step forward. The moment his foot touched the platform, the floor exploded with force. A shock wave rolled outward. Energy rippled through the metal. The entire chamber shook. Several engineers were thrown off balance. Alarms screamed. Energy readings jumped higher than any record in the system's history. Graphs broke their scales. Numbers turned into warning symbols. Screens flashed red. Critical, critical, critical. The test was no longer measuring strength or endurance. It was fighting to stay intact. The platform cracked beneath the human's feet. Bolts snapped. Energy fields flared wildly, trying to contain the force. Behind the energy glass, alien observers stepped back. Some pressed themselves against the walls. Others stared in silence, eyes wide with fear. The laughter was gone. No one spoke. One engineer whispered, barely audible, "This is not a test anymore." The human raised his head. His eyes were focused, calm, unbroken. The system ran one final calculation. Every safeguard activated at once, every limit removed. Still, the numbers continued to rise. Then the system stopped trying. A single message appeared at the center of every screen. Subject exceeds design parameters. The words stayed there, glowing. No alarms followed, no warnings, just silence. The engineers understood what that message meant. The system could not continue. It had reached a truth it was never built to accept. The human was beyond measurement. The platform groaned one last time, struggling to hold together. The engineers waited, unsure of what would happen next. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Combat Assessment did not know how to proceed, and the human was still standing.
The test shut down. All at once, the noise stopped. Alarms faded. The deep hum of the system went quiet. Lights dimmed across the chamber. Energy fields collapsed and vanished into thin air. Dust floated slowly in the air. The human remained on the platform. He bent forward slightly, hands on his knees, breathing hard. His chest rose and fell. Sweat dripped onto the cracked metal beneath his boots. But he was still standing, unbroken. Around the chamber, engineers stared at their screens. No one spoke, no one moved. The data was still there, numbers frozen at impossible values, graphs broken and unreadable, warnings stacked on top of warnings. The system had not failed. It had done exactly what it was built to do. It had measured until it could measure no more. It had been overloaded. One engineer slowly removed his hands from the control panel. Another lowered his head. "This should not be possible," someone whispered. They began to erase the data. Not out of anger, not out of shame, out of fear. If this information spread, panic would follow. Other species would demand answers. Some would demand weapons. Others would demand distance. The engineers worked quietly, deleting files, locking records, sealing backups. A new internal rule was written into the system. Simple, clear. Human performance cannot be safely measured. The rule carried no explanation. It did not need one. Security officers entered the chamber. They moved toward the platform carefully, as if the human might still break something by accident. The human straightened and stepped down. His legs shook, but he walked on his own. No restraints were used, none were needed. As he passed the engineers, no one met his eyes. Some looked at the floor, others stared at blank screens. The human was escorted down a long corridor. Metal doors slid open and closed behind him. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any alarm. The human did not look back. He did not know what the engineers had decided. He only knew the test was over. Behind the sealed chamber doors, the engineers remained still. They had tested countless species. They had measured empires. But today, they had learned something new. Some beings were not meant to be placed inside systems. They were meant to change them.
The changes began quietly. Within months, testing protocols across the galaxy were rewritten. Not announced, not explained, just changed. Human names disappeared from ranking lists. Their scores were removed from comparison charts. Their files were locked behind restricted access. Humans were placed in a separate category. No numbers, no limits. Other species noticed. Questions spread through academies, fleets, and research worlds. Why were humans missing from the rankings? What rule had they broken? The engineers gave no public answers. Privately, they asked new questions. They stopped asking how strong humans were. They stopped asking how fast they could move. They asked something far more troubling. Why did humans keep adapting when limits were reached? The data they kept, hidden and incomplete, showed a pattern. When pressure increased, humans resisted. When resistance failed, they adjusted. When adjustment was not enough, they pushed harder. Pain did not stop them. Stress did not shut them down. Limits were not warnings to humans. They were challenges. Engineers studied human history in secret. They saw fragile bodies survive harsh worlds. They saw short lifespans filled with constant struggle. They saw humans improve tools, systems, and themselves again and again. Failure did not end them. It shaped them. Other species were built to function inside perfect systems. Humans were built inside imperfect ones. That difference mattered. Military planners took notice. Training programs were rewritten. Human units were no longer tested like others. They were observed instead. Diplomats adjusted their language. Words like maximum and final were removed when humans were present. Even machines changed. New systems were designed with one rule in mind: do not push humans to their limits. Because limits did not stop them. They triggered something else. Across the galaxy, a quiet understanding spread. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest. They were not the largest. But they were something far more dangerous. They adapted. They endured. They broke rules by surviving them. And the engineers who once built the perfect test finally understood the truth. Humans were not built to fit systems. They were built to break them.